Good, right.
All right, guys, I think we are now live. I want to welcome everybody to our Tuesday Nomberg Law Live that we try to bring to you every Tuesday at this time. And as I've always said, for the last couple of years we've been doing this, we try to bring interesting conversations with people in their areas of expertise. And I am so pleased to have my buddy Will Pryor with me this morning. Good morning, Will. I hope all
Hey,
is well
good
in your
morning.
world.
Good morning, Bernard.
It's good to see you. Well, if you don't know, and most of you outside the Vanderbilt world don't, Will and I were briefly teammates and classmates at Vanderbilt back in the day. And Will is now Chief Deputy District Attorney in Shreveport, Louisiana. And we have a whole host of topics that we're going to jump into. But before we do, Will, if you would tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and what you do in Shreveport.
Okay. Good morning to everybody. It's great. Thank you for having me and inviting me to be a part of your show. And thank you for what you're doing to keep the Commodore family together. I am the Chief Deputy District Attorney in Shreveport in Caddo Parrish in our state. A parish is like a county. And when I left, graduated from Vanderbilt, I then went on to LSU Law School and graduated from there. And I got a clerkship after that with a Court of Appeal judge. 20 years later, that Court of Appeal judge was elected district attorney here and asked me to come along with him. And that's when I shut down my own law practice, which I'd had for about 15 years, and became the chief deputy district attorney here. And which I love my job, love this area. This is the area I originally was born and came from. We moved to Homewood, Alabama, outside of Birmingham before my junior year of high school, which was a life-changing experience, which enabled me to go to Vanderbilt.
Will, I know that you were at Homewood for your junior and senior years before you came up to Vanderbilt. And I want to say, was it a job change for your mom? Is that what brought you from Shreveport to the Birmingham area?
Yes, they, back in those days, that was in the late 80s, they moved the entire Bell South operation to Birmingham. And we were a part of that crew of hundreds of Shreveporters that got moved to Birmingham.
Well, what was that like transferring from Shreveport to Birmingham as a rising junior, a fellow who also played sports? How was that transition for you?
It was tough. I was also my class president and, played sports. But my mom chose a great high school for us, Homewood High School. And I tell people, I just doubled my friends. And I kept my friends from home that I grew up with. And I made more friends in Birmingham and great people. My mom loved Homewood. Pastor John Porter at 6th Avenue Baptist Church, son was going there. And 6th Avenue is one of the leading African-American churches in Birmingham, as was the son of the other leading African-American church, Brandon Pettigrew. So she knew it was a good school where two of the leading African-American pastors of Birmingham could have sent their kids to any school in the area, and they both chose Homewood. They're both awesome football players as well.
Well, let's talk briefly about that experience, about playing at Homewood. Ultimately, you ended up coming up to Vanderbilt. I think you and I are about 2 to 3 years apart. Maybe your freshman year may have been my senior year. But did you know you were coming to Vanderbilt? I guess, how did that evolve?
Well, growing up in Shreveport, we're only 180 miles from Dallas, and we're 5 hours from New Orleans. So before I moved there, I kind of probably envisioned myself going to Southern Methodist University or Tulane maybe. But coming to the southeast part of the United States, I found out more about Vanderbilt. And my high school coach, Gerald Gann, played at Alabama or went to Alabama with then Vanderbilt running back coach, Matthews. And so that's how I first heard a lot about Vanderbilt. And I had several classmates, or my friend Chris Gray's sister-in-law, Susie Steelman, went to Vanderbilt. And I had a friend on the Vanderbilt swim team from my old school in Shreveport, Catherine Pringle, who was a star swimmer at Vanderbilt before they shut down the swim team. So I had some friends that were going there, and just went up there on a weekend, on the recruiting weekend, and it was just so great. Then it was so close to Birmingham. We had just moved from Shreveport to Birmingham. I didn't really want to go further out, maybe to like an Ivy League school or somewhere, and be even further from my mother.
The academics has always been part of your importance to you, and excuse me, was that also another influence, the ability to play football in college as well as have a strong academic career? Was that
Right.
I guess were both of those equally important to you?
Yes, and I have a big brother that was attending Harvard, who graduated from there. He went to Harvard, then went to Yale for law school. So I had some big shoes to follow.
I was going to say,
my final two choices came down to Vanderbilt and Duke. And Vanderbilt, I just had a great time on my recruiting visit, and it was so close to Shreveport. I mean, close to Birmingham, and I had my friends there that I had mentioned before. That it was just a great fit. Plus, playing in the SEC was really my
hard
goal.
path up.
Coach at Duke at the time was Coach Pryor, and I remember on the visit up there, he kind of frankly said that he may not be there too long. You know, he was pretty frank. You know, if Florida offered, and he left them.
Hey, at least he was honest with you, and that's
always
that's what happened. Well, Will, you have a unique perspective, I think, having attended a private university in the Southeastern Conference with Vanderbilt, but also attending as a student one of the larger state institutions in the SEC, Louisiana State University, LSU. So from that perspective, obviously there's many different contrasts and comparisons between the schools, but you have an extra layer in that afterward you've been appointed to what the regions board. Explain that perspective, because I want to dive into a little bit of a comparison between the schools, not just from an athletic standpoint, but also from an academic approach standpoint.
Right. Well, in 2017, the governor here appointed me to the State Board of Regents, and that's the board that oversees higher education in our state, and which puts me over the LSU system as well. And so I also went to law school at LSU, and had firsthand. I worked for Coach Jerry DiNardo after I went to law school. After my first year of law school, it's when he left Vanderbilt and came to LSU, and I actually worked for him there. I helped run the football camps, and I had a little student job helping the football team. So I had a little firsthand experience. As a matter of fact, I suggested the statewide tour that's now an annual tradition that the coaches at LSU do. That was my idea. And getting the coaches from the New Orleans high schools at the football camp. Because at the time, a lot of the players from New Orleans were not going to LSU, and figured out a way to get hire those high school coaches from New Orleans to work the football camp to help bridge that gulf, which worked.
Well, clearly it did. I know that for a while in the 90s and the early 2000s, LSU football wasn't where it is obviously today, right. But it certainly helped to build their program back up.
Right.
But what I want to briefly talk about is you've been through the experience of being an undergraduate at Vanderbilt and playing in the football program. So you've had that 4 years experience. Then you go to LSU, and it's a completely different approach, in my opinion, because it's a very large state university. And maybe the priorities are different at state universities than they are at private schools. I mean, you and I could talk about this for days and days, but I know you have a unique experience, your love of football and being active with the sport while you were in school. And certainly now that you had Coach DiNardo as part of your time you were at Vanderbilt, and then part of your time when you were at LSU, I kind of want to dig into that a little bit because I think it's such an interesting contrast about how the two universities approach that.
Well, it was a huge difference, and you saw, and I was able to firsthand watch Coach Jerry DiNardo change. You know, he was very hard at Vanderbilt. That was his first head coaching job. I think he's admitted in interviews that he was trying to test us, test our limits. And at LSU, he became more of the politician type. You have to deal with the boosters. You don't have to deal with that at Vanderbilt. At LSU, you're shooting TV commercials, dealing with boosters, being nice to high school coaches. At Vanderbilt, you can be as rough and gruff as you want to be, as rough on the players, and he was. And he was sort of a kinder, gentler guy at LSU, and you have to be. Of course, the players, the talent level was, he was dealing with probably better athletes. So he didn't have to be the tough guy. It was more, X's and O's, getting guys in line, policing them, the real life struggles of a institution. He didn't have to police us at Vanderbilt. He didn't have to worry about if we're going to be out all night at the bars. At LSU, he had real life concerns, and he had a different sort of a process there. As far as the schools, LSU is all in on football. They're all in on winning. Their new baseball stadium looks as nice as any AAA team in the country.
Fox Stadium is one of the top stadiums in the country. You're absolutely right.
Amazing. And the money, the boosters, they have a $29 million locker room that they just debuted last year, in a state that's broke, in a state that's bottom of education and bottom of all kind of bad ratings. They're number one in football. They're number one in assistant football coaches' salaries, and they take pride in the success of that football program, and they're all in on it. Vanderbilt, the perspective is they're not all in on it. They're not all in. They tip their toe in, and we've had two meteors. One was James Franklin for 2 years, and one was our baseball coach, Tim Corbin. Other than that, you're looking at futility, kind of the same old, which would not be accepted. It's a different beast at LSU. Kids grow up wanting to go there. Kids don't really grow up wanting to be a Vanderbilt football player. They have an Alabama, Auburn, big state universities. We're hampered by being in that conference as far as winning in football, because those universities are huge. The fan base is huge. The talent base is huge. And, it would take an inordinate effort to be to par. But it was shown by James Franklin that it can be done. And he did it for 2 years. We had a 9-win season and a 10-win season in 2013 and 2012. Unfortunately, we didn't go all in and present him, hey, what do you need assistant coaches wise? What do you need stadium wise? And let's do it. Instead, we're still talking almost a decade later about, plans to improve. Sure. While at a school like LSU, they saw that, their stadium was at 80,000 and Alabama had gone to 100,000. And guess what? They raised some money and got their stadium at 100,000. Yeah. So it's just a whole different attitude towards sports.
Yeah. I mean, I will say this, a little bit in defense. I think you're absolutely right about football. And you and I could talk about this and debate it for forever and won't have all the right answers or all the best answers. But clearly Coach Corbin has found the answers. He's been able to bring that program to national prominence, and they've 2 national titles in 5 years, and he's figured it out. but
Right.
baseball is not football. Football is a whole different animal.
Right.
There's so much more money involved. There's so many more people involved, and hopefully they'll settle things down in the athletics department and be able to keep improving. But you're right, it's been that way for many, many years. But I just thought you have such a unique perspective, having in the past so many years been able to experience both. One as an undergraduate and the other as a law student, and now being on the Board of Regents for higher education, you really have a yet another unique perspective. So I appreciate you sharing some of your insight about those things. And for those of you just joining us, and I've got so many people to say hello to for you, I've got Will Pryor, my former teammate at Vanderbilt. He's now Chief Deputy District Attorney in Caddo. Am I saying that right? Caddo?
Yes, Caddo Parrish.
Caddo Parrish, Shreveport, Louisiana. And it's always great to catch up with Will. But Will, let me tell you who we got.
Some people might know me by chicken wing.
They do. They do.
You know my name, they do is chicken wing.
Well, I was going to get to that in just a minute, the history of that story. But I want to say hey to Mitch Jackson, my buddy out in California, Cheryl Jernigan, Terrence Kelly, Daniel Jaffe, Angela Spooner. She says she's proud of you. And does LSU give back to the communities? That's one of her questions. So I'll let you field that.
That's a great question. They give back. Well, LSU basically supports the community. The Baton Rouge area, LSU's probably in the state of our whole state is probably the biggest employer. They just mean so much. A game day in Baton Rouge supports that community and supports the state. If we don't have football this fall, you're talking about a significant economic hit to a university, a community, and a state as a whole. You're talking about 100,000 people, another 50,000 people outside tailgating. They don't even have tickets, that are buying gas, buying food, buying game tickets, hotels, going out to eat, buying t-shirts. It's amazing. The tens of millions of dollars per Saturday, per weekend of a game week.
Will, I saw.
Not to mention when they play other state teams, the smaller teams, for the payday, the $1 million that goes to another school like Nickel State, Southeast Louisiana, Louisiana Tech. Those are the entire athletic budgets for these schools come from those type of games. So they have enormous effect on the community. Do they give back? LSU provides jobs, public hospitals, public doctors, research, just inordinate amount of effect they have on the state.
The trickle down or ripple effect from the university into the communities throughout the state, I'm sure is quite.
And the same in Alabama and Auburn and Knoxville and Athens, everywhere.
Quite impactful. I did see last week, I think this was last week, that Mississippi State had put out an announcement from the athletic department, that on-campus tailgating, assuming football season is going forward, on-campus tailgating is not going to be permitted this year. And
wow.
That was the first announcement of its type that I have seen like that. I also want to welcome Harvey Fast, who's watching, and several others. So thank you, guys. With me talking with Will Pryor. All right, Will, I want you to give us the story of the nickname that many people affectionately know you as Chicken Wing. So tell us that. You got to tell that story.
Well, there's a great story. At Vanderbilt, of course, the first week of practice is just the freshmen by themselves. And unfortunately, I was starting to pick up a nickname of Smiley, which doesn't really comport to a football player. And we sat down. That was given to me by the late DJ Bradley, who was a teammate of mine there. And we had a dinner with the upper class players. And lo and behold, who sat in front of me was Renford Reese. And he was one of the most loquacious players on the team. And he was one of our star players. And remember the name, Renford Reese. And he sat across from me, looked at me and said, "Boy, you could tear up a chicken wing." and everyone roared, and the name stuck. It was that simple of a story. 4 years later, after Renford has graduated, my mom was the homecoming queen at University of Colorado. And while she was in college, she married briefly the football star at Colorado named George Reese. And Renford and I were talking. I said, Renford, what's you doing after graduation? He said, I'm going to Colorado, I think, and travel around. I said, oh, okay, my mom went to Colorado. He said, oh, yeah, my uncle went to Colorado. And then we looked at each other, and this is pre-cell phone days. We ran back to our dorms to call our parents to let them know we realized we were almost first cousins.
Oh, that's so funny.
My mom had married his uncle in college.
It's just, isn't that weird how
his parents were the wedding party.
I always thought that chicken wing might have been affiliated or associated with an injury or the way you carried yourself on the field or something like that. But that's very funny.
Right. It was that simple.
That's simple. Sometimes the best stories are just that simple. Well, guys, I'm talking with Will Pryor, my buddy from Vanderbilt days. He is Chief Deputy District Attorney in Caddo Parrish in Shreveport, Louisiana. We're just all over the board with some of our discussion. And Will, I know that you're still very passionate about Vanderbilt sports. I know you enjoy getting together when possible at football games or just making connections. That's always been some part of your personality that I've always appreciated, that you're a connector, that you just enjoy meeting new friends, making new friends. And I bet you're on your phone, there must be thousands of names in there, people you can just call up from back in the day. Yes. But I want to take you back to your Vanderbilt days for a few minutes. And I know that, on a football program, you got your superstars, you got your scrubs, and you got everybody in between. And leaders on a team are not necessarily always going to be those guys who are making all the plays and they're the high profile media people. It takes all types. And there are leaders who can be on the scout team. There are leaders who are injured but show their way by just how they're dealing with injuries. And I've always considered you one of those guys, a leader on a team. And so here's my question for you is, what have you taken away from your football, your team sports days that you're now using in your life with a team that you're now leading in the district attorney's office? Because I know you work on a team. You don't work by yourself. You have lots of help, lots of team members. How has that translated from your sports teams days to what you're doing now for your profession?
Well, first of all, thank you for what you just said. It means so much to me. I definitely was not a star player. I was more on that other end of the spectrum. But I did I was once asked what was the most greatest honor I've had, and I had to think about it. And it was, I think we had a team vote. This is after you had left, but Coach DiNardo took us out to Bell Buckle, Tennessee, and we were going to vote on team captains. And Coach DiNardo announced that he was going to have me be the one that counted the votes because everybody trusted me. Mm-hmm. And he and I went in the back and counted the votes. That meant so much. That came out the blue. I was 18 or 19 years old. And that the team voted for me to be the one to count the votes. That meant a lot. Means so much to me. My head spins even to today thinking about that the guys voted me, black, white, the whole team, to be that person. That means a lot. So I try to be the same person. It means a lot to me when people say, man, you're just the same person. You want to be down to earth, relate to people, be able to listen, see both sides of issues. I try to bring that to my job, to see not only did a person commit this crime, why did they do it? Was there a reason to try to understand an underlying problem? I try to bring some of that to my job, and especially dealing with people. Being on a team, of course, you deal with all sorts of personalities. Some of your greatest players are quiet as a mouse. Some of your worst players have the biggest mouths. It helps when your best players are also your leaders, but that's not always the case. Some people lead by example. There's all types. There's the Tim Duncans, then there's the Richard Shermans. No team is the same. There's the Russell Wilsons, and then there's the Brett Favre's. There's all kind of different players. Cam Newton, you're in Birmingham. There's types that are a little more flashy, but they work hard. Then there's the types that don't say anything, like a Troy Aikman. So just know you can't paint everybody with a brush of what makes success. I try to take everybody for how they are and treat everybody fair. I think Jimmy Johnson once said, you can't treat everybody equal, but you got to treat everybody fair.
Well, that is certainly a trademark, and I know that's something that you try to do every day with not just the people who are in your office and helping you to prosecute cases or decide whether to prosecute cases, but in the courtroom as well. You've got a judge, you've got a defendant, you've got the typically an attorney probably representing them, or they may be pro se, but it doesn't matter. I'm sure you treat them with fairness like you always have, and that really is it's a hard thing to do. But when you have that trait, that is such a unique characteristic that really attracts people to you. And I'm sure that that's something you've honed over the years, and I applaud that. And I know that you'll continue to use that, not just in your professional life, but in your personal life as well.
Well, I think one thing I've done, as a lawyer, is to respect time. When you throw out words, 8 years, 10 years, 5 years, 5 years is a long period of time, to sentence someone to 5 years of someone's life on if it's a victimless offense, like a drug offense or DWIs or something like that. We have to reimagine some things, for someone to get 10 years where you're wrecking a family. So I try to be respectful of time. That's a word I heard somewhere along the way, and to really think about the impact. Some people have committed crimes where they need to be in prison for decades or for the rest of your life. But when other crimes, you just can't just throw out, you committed 2 felonies, therefore you need to do double-digit years. Well, the 2 felonies might have been drug possessions that have added up. So there's just a new way that from my personality that I've tried to impart into the district attorney's office, which sometimes has a tradition of being unfeeling. And I try to bring a little bit of that, and that people have probably seen from my life. Like I said, my sophomore year, I was the class president. I've always been a leader, but just try to do it on, just being the same person I was then when we moved to Homewood, Alabama. And I just doubled my friends,
Yeah, authenticity is a great word with you. If you try to be somebody else, people see through that immediately. But before we get out of here, Will, I want to say hey to former players and always Commodores, O.J. Fleming, Brian Diggs. Let's see, is it Daniela Robbins Piggott has also joined us. So thank you guys for tuning in for a few minutes.
Brian Diggs got me watching The Young and the Restless. And unfortunately, I'm still watching. I do want to mention from Homewood, one of the biggest, I've never had a chance to ever say it, mention Chris Gray, one of the greatest players I ever played it with or against. He's in Birmingham, one of the greatest people I've ever met. I've always looked up to him. Also, my old Homewood, I mentioned the head coach. Our offensive coordinator then that became the head coach later was Bob Newton, and he's a coaching legend in Alabama. I think about him so much. He made me tough. And I haven't been through anything in college or anything in my life, bar exams, anything. What he did to me at Homewood toughened me for anything I've been through. And I want to mention that publicly to him, and that I love him, and he meant that much to me in my life.
Those type of shout outs and how people develop their life lessons and then later utilize them speaks volumes for not only the people who you are counting as mentors, but you, I'm sure, pay it forward to the next generation or to people that are in your life. But Will, I want to leave you with this as we conclude. I want you to give us your favorite game day experience or tradition from Vanderbilt football and your favorite from LSU football. Share with us something that really you enjoy from both programs at different times.
Oh, wow. First, I have to mention the great pep rallies at Homewood High School. They were awesome. Uh, Vanderbilt, uh, I always enjoy that night before that walk through practice on Friday. Then you go to the movies with your team.
Mhm.
You know, that was a really good bonding experience. And we'd always catch a good movie. Uh, and then in the locker room before the game, it would be quiet. And I always will never forget Carlos Thomas. He'd pipe up, start doing some rah-rah speeches, and Renford Reese, he had some good rah-rah speeches. It always takes someone to break out the box to be that player, to get everybody fired up when the coaches are gone. And those guys took it upon themselves.
Mhm.
At going to like a LSU game, you have to see the tailgating and just the band on the field, you know, playing the Fighting Tiger song and the Golden Girls. And it's just an amazing experience to see for any SEC fan to go to a game there, especially at nighttime. The tailgating is wonderful, the food, everything. So those are two great experiences I can think off the top of my head. And of course, seeing the live Tiger mic is incredible as well.
I'm sure it is. I went to an LSU game as a really young child at night, and that still sticks an impression with me. But Will, thank you for spending some time with me today. It's been a fun trip down memory lane and catching up with you again.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Well, guys, that'll conclude us for today. Another episode of Nomberg Law Live. As I have said many times, I try to bring interesting conversations with people in their areas of expertise. And Will Pryor certainly fits that. What a fun discussion. And as we hopefully are transitioning closer to into this, now we're into the summer, getting into the fall. Hopefully we'll have some version of college football and team sports, but please continue to use common sense. Wear a mask when you're in public, think of others, and hopefully we'll get through this together. But thank you guys. Have a safe rest of your week, and we will talk to you another time. Be well.